Close your eyes and let the noise of the present world dissolve into silence. Imagine Europe not as it is today, carved into nations, cities, and borders, but as it once was, a land of deep forests, winding rivers, and scattered tribes. The Roman Empire, once a mighty web of roads and laws, has crumbled into fragments. In its shadow, new powers begin to stir, and among them, one would rise to shape the very foundation of Europe itself. The Frankish story is both a tale of savagery and of sanctity, of warriors who became kings, and kings who became legends. In the chaos after Rome's fall, they were seen as barbarians, rough, untamed, wielding swords instead of scrolls. Yet from their wildness came order, from their bloodshed came kingdoms. Out of their darkness, a new light would flicker across Europe. This is not only a history of battles and crowns, it is also a story of hidden truths, of kings whose long hair was said to hold sacred power, of warriors who bent to baptism and found divine destiny, of dynasties that claimed to carry both steel and spirit. The Frankish Kingdom was not merely a land on a map. It was a crucible where myth and history fused, where order was wrestled from chaos. As you drift deeper into this story, imagine the mist rising from the forests of ancient Gaul. Hear the clash of swords faint in the distance, then the solemn chants of monks in candlelit halls. Feel the weight of centuries pressing down, yet whispering upward, shaping the Europe we know today. Welcome to the tale of the Franks. To understand the Franks, you must first imagine them not as kings or emperors, but as tribes. Picture the forests of northern Europe in the waning days of Rome. Dense, shadowed woods stretch endlessly, broken only by rivers winding like silver threads. Within these forests lived the Franks, small bands of warriors and families, bound together by loyalty, blood, and survival. The Romans, who ruled the provinces of Gaul, called them barbarians. To Rome, they were outsiders, dwellers at the edge of the empire, fierce raiders who slipped across frontiers, striking settlements, then vanishing back into the trees. Yet to the Franks themselves, they were more than raiders. They were people of the rivers, the Rhine, the Meuse, the Scheldt, shaped by water as much as by land. In time, some Franks served as foederati, allied soldiers under Roman command. They fought for pay, for plunder, and for prestige, even as their kin raided the very empire they served. Here lies one of the first contrasts of their story. Outsiders and insiders at once, destroying and defending the empire that both feared and relied upon them. As Rome weakened, its legions thinned, its authority waned. The Franks seized opportunity. What had been raids became settlements. Villages rose where once only warbands camped. Their leaders, chieftains of the old ways, began to claim the titles of kings. The Franks were no longer shadows on the frontier. They were becoming the masters of Gaul. Life among them was both harsh and vibrant. Warriors swore oaths around roaring fires, their long hair flowing as a symbol of freedom. Women tended households and fields, but also wielded influence in clan politics. Pagan gods, spirits of forests, rivers, and storms were honored with offerings, while Christian missionaries whispered of a single God who offered salvation. It was a world balanced on the edge of change. The Franks were neither wholly Roman nor wholly barbarian. They were something in between, a people standing at the threshold of a new order. And as the empire fell, they would step through that threshold and claim a destiny that neither Rome nor their pagan ancestors could have imagined. As you drift deeper into this story, picture a Frankish warrior on the banks of the Rhine. His sword is not polished like a Roman gladius, it is rough, forged in fire, meant for survival. His shield bears no imperial emblem, only the marks of his tribe. And yet, behind his eyes, there is something stirring: ambition, the dream that his people, once scattered, might rise to become rulers of their own world. The forest still lingers in your imagination. The rivers still wind across the plains of Gaul. But now, from the haze of tribes and warbands, a single figure begins to emerge. His name was Clovis, and his story is the story of how the Franks, once scattered warriors of the frontier, became kings of a kingdom that would outlive empires. Clovis was born around 466 CE, a child of the Salian Franks. He inherited leadership young, at just 15, when his father Childeric died. Imagine him, still barely more than a boy, but already burdened with the crown of his people. His world was fractured. Rome had collapsed in the west. Visigoths held the south. Burgundians ruled the Rhone. Alemanni prowled the east. Gaul was no longer Roman. It was a mosaic of shifting powers, a land of both opportunity and danger. Clovis's genius was not merely his strength, but his vision. He understood that the Franks could not remain merely one tribe among many. They had to become something greater, united, formidable, a kingdom rather than a warband. And so, from the beginning, his reign was one of ambition. At 20, Clovis fought his first great battle at Soissons in 486. The last Roman governor of Gaul, Syagrius, still clung to a fragment of imperial rule, but against Clovis's warriors, Rome's shadow fell. The battle was fierce, yet decisive. Syagrius fled, was betrayed, and killed. And with that, Clovis claimed not just land, but legitimacy. The Franks had not merely conquered a rival, they had supplanted Rome itself. Imagine the field at Soissons. Banners fallen, shields cracked, and the young king standing victorious. The Romans had ruled Gaul for centuries, but now their torch had passed to barbarians turned kings. A new order was being born in the ashes of empire. Clovis, however, remained a pagan. He worshipped the old gods of his ancestors, spirits of war and thunder, guardians of rivers and forests. His queen, Clotilda, was different. She was a Burgundian princess, raised in the Christian faith. She whispered to him of a single God, of Christ who had conquered death, of baptism that washed not only the body, but the soul. At first, Clovis resisted. He was a warrior, and his gods were warriors' gods. But seeds were planted, seeds that would bloom in blood and fire. The turning point came at the Battle of Tolbiac against the Alemanni. The Franks were faltering. Their lines broke, their warriors fell, and defeat loomed. In desperation, Clovis did what he had sworn never to do. He called upon the God of his wife. "If you grant me victory," he prayed, "I will believe in you and be baptized in your name." The tide turned. The Alemanni king fell, his warriors fled, and Clovis stood triumphant. In that moment, he believed that the Christian God had answered, and so, true to his word, he embraced baptism. In Reims, on a winter's day around 496, Clovis entered the cathedral, robed not as a pagan warrior, but as a penitent. Saint Remigius, the bishop, awaited him. Imagine the scene: torches flickering, incense rising, chants echoing through stone arches. The water was poured upon his head, and the pagan king was remade a Christian. But it was not only Clovis who was baptized. 3,000 of his warriors followed him into the font. A people once devoted to many gods now bent their knee to one. In that moment, the destiny of the Franks changed forever. They were no longer outsiders. They were the champions of the Catholic Church in the West. Yet Clovis remained a king of iron and fire. His conversion did not soften him, it strengthened his resolve. With divine favor behind him, he embarked on campaigns that expanded his realm. He defeated the Burgundians, subdued the Alemanni, and clashed with the Visigoths at Vouillé in 507. There, his armies struck down Alaric Thu, king of the Visigoths, and claimed Aquitaine for the Franks. But even more than his victories, Clovis understood the value of unity. One by one, he eliminated rival Frankish kings, sometimes by war, sometimes by cunning, sometimes by sheer brutality. By the time of his death, the Franks were no longer a patchwork of tribes. They were a kingdom, bound under one crown, one faith, and one law. Clovis was both saintly and savage, baptized and bloody-handed. He prayed for victory even as he struck down his kin. He claimed the cross, yet wielded the sword without mercy. And it is this paradox that defines him. In him, the old world and the new collided. Pagan ferocity fused with Christian order. Barbarian ambition merged with Roman legacy. When he died in 511, he left behind not only land, but a dynasty, the Merovingians. His burial in Paris, at the Church of the Holy Apostles, later Saint Denis, was not merely a king's grave. It was the seed of a tradition that would endure for centuries. Pause here and consider how fragile yet powerful his choice was. Had he remained pagan, the Franks might have drifted into obscurity, another tribe swallowed by time. Instead, his baptism bound them to the church, to Rome's spiritual heirs, to the very current of history. From that moment onward, the Franks were not merely rulers of land, they were guardians of faith. And yet, Clovis's story is not one of purity. It is shadowed by blood, by betrayal, by ambition. His unity was forged not only in baptismal water, but in the deaths of rivals. His kingdom was born in contradiction, mercy preached in churches, vengeance practiced on battlefields. But perhaps that is why his legacy endures. He was not a saint, nor merely a barbarian. He was both, and in being both, he embodied the paradox of Europe itself, a continent forever torn between sword and scripture, chaos and order, destruction and renewal. As you drift with this story, picture Clovis at twilight, standing upon the walls of his new kingdom. The forests stretch before him, dark and endless. The rivers glint in the fading Sunday. Behind him, monks chant in Latin. Before him, warriors sharpen their blades. He is both barbarian and Christian, conqueror and convert. His people look to him as king. The church looks to him as champion. And history will remember him as the man who turned the Franks from shadows into sovereigns. The story of Clovis did not end with his death. His bloodline, the Merovingians, carried his legacy forward, though in ways both glorious and tragic. They were known as the long-haired kings, rulers whose flowing locks were more than vanity. They were symbols of sacred authority. To cut a Merovingian's hair was not mere humiliation. It was to strip him of power, to unmake him as king. Imagine their courts, shimmering with gold, filled with warriors in heavy cloaks, and priests in robes of white. In the center sat a Merovingian king, hair cascading upon his shoulders, a crown upon his brow. Yet beneath this splendor, intrigue and danger always lingered. The mystique of the bloodline. The Merovingians held a strange aura, as if they were more than men. Legends whispered that their dynasty descended from Merovec, a semi-mythical figure said to be born of both man and sea creature. Half human, half something otherworldly. Whether myth or metaphor, the tale set them apart, wrapping their lineage in mystery. The Franks believed their kings carried a spark of divine destiny. Clovis's sons divided his realm, as was the Frankish custom. Each inherited a portion of land, and soon, Gaul became a patchwork of smaller Frankish kingdoms. Neustria in the west, Austrasia in the east, Burgundy in the southeast. Brothers ruled side by side, but also against one another. Their alliances shifted like sand. One moment united, the next at war. It was not only kings who shaped this dynasty. Queens, mothers, and princesses wielded power with cunning and steel. None were more infamous than Queen Brunhilde and Queen Fredegund. Brunhilde, a Visigothic princess, married into the Merovingian line. She was intelligent, determined, and ruthless in her pursuit of influence. Fredegund, her rival, rose from humble origins to seize the throne by cunning and murder. Their rivalry spanned decades, filling Gaul with bloodshed and intrigue. Imagine the Frankish court in those days. Whispers behind pillars, daggers hidden beneath cloaks, alliances sealed by marriage and broken by betrayal. Kings fell to poison, warriors turned against their lords, and queens pulled invisible strings that shook kingdoms. By the 7th century, the Merovingians had grown both powerful and fragile. They ruled vast lands, yet their authority often weakened by constant partitions. Each generation divided the kingdom again, leaving it vulnerable to internal strife. Their royal image remained dazzling kings with long hair, symbols of sacred lineage, but their actual power often slipped into the hands of advisors and generals. Still, the Merovingians left their mark on history. They built churches, patronized monasteries, and supported the growing influence of Christianity. Pilgrims traveled across their lands, bishops gained authority, and holy men wandered forests spreading faith. In the Merovingian era, the roots of medieval Christendom took hold, and yet their reign was shadowed by violence. Swords were drawn as quickly as prayers were spoken. Brothers murdered brothers, mothers schemed against sons. Kings perished under suspicious circumstances. The Franks, once united under Clovis, often seemed trapped in cycles of civil war. Why then do the Merovingians remain so fascinating? Perhaps it is because of their aura of mystery, their hair, their semi-mythical origins, their strange blend of brutality and sanctity, all combined to make them larger than life. Even in decline, they seemed untouchable, their bloodline carrying an almost supernatural weight. Some later legends, woven in medieval imagination, even claim their dynasty held secrets tied to sacred bloodlines, stories that would echo into myths of the Holy Grail. Whether fact or fantasy, the Merovingians became more than rulers. They became symbols of the blurred line between myth and history. As generations passed, the Merovingian kings grew weaker. Real authority began to shift to their household stewards, known as the mayors of the palace. These men controlled armies, managed land, and governed the kingdom, while the kings sat as figureheads. Picture a Merovingian king in his later centuries. Hair still long, crown still gleaming, yet powerless. He sits upon a throne, but decisions are made elsewhere. His presence is ceremonial, his role sacred but hollow. The people still revere him, yet all know his commands carry no weight. This contrast, sacred king versus powerless puppet, defined the twilight of the Merovingians. They had risen from myth and blood, but were fading into shadows, replaced by stronger hands behind the throne. As you drift deeper into this story, imagine the flicker of candlelight in a Merovingian hall. A king reclines on his throne, long hair glinting in the firelight. Beside him, a queen whispers counsel, her eyes sharp with ambition. Beyond the hall, warriors sharpen blades, monks chant prayers, and peasants till fields. The kingdom lives, breathes, struggles. Yet beneath its surface, change stirs. For the Merovingians, glory and decay walked hand in hand. They embodied both the majesty of kingship and the fragility of human power. Their story is one of splendor wrapped in shadow, of bloodlines claimed as sacred even as they dissolved into weakness. And soon, the shadows around them would grow stronger. The mayors of the palace, once mere servants, would seize the substance of power. The long-haired kings would remain in name, but their time was fading. The age of figurehead rulers was dawning, and from their decline, a new dynasty was waiting to rise. The Merovingian kings still sat upon their thrones, their long hair flowing, their crowns gleaming. But beneath the shimmer of ceremony, real power was slipping from their hands. Into the shadows stepped new figures, the mayors of the palace. At first, they were stewards, administrators who managed the royal household. Yet, as the kings weakened, these stewards became the true rulers of the Frankish world. Imagine the royal court in the 7th century. The king presides in name, yet beside him stands the mayor of the palace, issuing commands, levying taxes, leading armies. The people bow to the king, but they obey the mayor. Gradually, the sacred aura of the Merovingians was hollowed out, while the mayors gathered substance and strength. Among them rose one man whose name would echo in legend, Charles Martel, the Hammer. In 732, the Frankish realm trembled as Islamic forces advanced from Spain into Gaul. The armies of the Umayyad Caliphate, swift and disciplined, threatened to push deeper into Europe. The stage was set for one of history's defining battles, the Battle of Tours. Picture the field. Frankish warriors forming tight ranks, shields locked, spears braced. Across from them, the cavalry of the Caliphate, fierce and swift. The clash was brutal, echoing like thunder across the plain. Until at last, Charles Martel's warriors broke the enemy's charge. The hammer had struck, and Europe's course was altered. The advance of Islam into Gaul was halted, and Charles emerged as the protector of Christendom. Though still a servant of a Merovingian king, Charles ruled in truth. His victory gave him prestige, his leadership gave him authority, and his bloodline would shape the future. The rise of the mayors of the palace reveals a timeless truth. Power does not always rest in crowns or sacred rituals. Sometimes it lies in the hands of those who act, while others only preside. The long-haired kings still wore their symbols, but the mayors carried the weight of destiny. As you drift deeper into this story, imagine the quiet shift of power. The king, a figurehead. The mayor, the hammer. The Merovingian age was fading, and from its twilight, a new dynasty was preparing to seize the dawn. From the shadows of the Merovingians, through the strength of Charles Martel, a new dynasty emerged, the Carolingian, and at its heart stood a figure who seemed to stride between history and myth. Charlemagne, Charles the Great. His name would echo across centuries, invoked by kings, emperors, and dreamers as the man who revived the idea of Rome itself. Born in 742, Charlemagne inherited not only land but a vision. His father, Pepin the Short, had formally ended the age of the Merovingians, placing the crown upon his own head with the blessing of the Pope. The stage was set for a dynasty bound not only to blood and sword, but to faith itself. When Pepin died, his kingdom passed to his sons, and soon Charlemagne rose as the undisputed ruler. Imagine him, tall, commanding, his presence filling any hall. Chroniclers describe a man of energy and resolve, a warrior who could ride for days, a ruler who could speak with both monks and soldiers. His reign became a tapestry woven with conquest and creation. The conqueror, Charlemagne's armies marched far and wide. He subdued the Lombards in Italy, brought Saxon tribes into submission after decades of brutal wars, and pushed the borders of his kingdom to the Pyrenees and the Danube. Each victory expanded not only his lands, but his sense of destiny. His wars were framed as holy struggles, campaigns that carried the cross as well as the sword. The Saxons, fierce pagans of the northern forests, resisted him fiercely. Yet, time and again, Charlemagne returned, baptizing the conquered, burning idols, and planting churches where groves once stood, the patron of learning. But Charlemagne was not only a warrior. In the halls of Aachen, his chosen capital, he built something remarkable, a court of learning, a beacon in the so-called Dark Ages. He gathered scholars from across Europe, Alcuin of York, Paul the Deacon, Einhard. Monks copied manuscripts by candlelight, preserving wisdom that might otherwise have been lost. Schools were founded, script refined, the Latin tongue polished. This was the Carolingian Renaissance, a flicker of light glowing against surrounding shadows. Imagine the monastery at night, the silence broken only by the scratch of quills upon parchment, the glow of lamps illuminating words that had survived Rome, now carried into the future by careful hands. Charlemagne's sword conquered, but his vision preserved. In the year 800, on Christmas Day, Charlemagne entered St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. As he knelt in prayer, Pope Leo III placed upon his head a crown of gold. In that moment, the king of the Franks became Emperor of the Romans. The title of Rome, long fallen in the West, had been reborn. The act was more than ceremony, it was symbol. Rome had died, but its spirit lived again in Charlemagne. His empire stretched across much of Western Europe, its heart bound by faith, its authority blessed by the church. He was not merely a king. He was the new Augustus, a figure who seemed to embody both history and legend. Yet Charlemagne's empire was not unshakable. Beneath its grandeur lay fragility, rebellious nobles, restless frontiers, the constant tension between war and peace. His dream of a unified Christian empire would not outlast his heirs. But in his lifetime, he embodied the possibility that from chaos, order could rise once more. As you drift deeper into this tale, imagine standing in Aachen's chapel. Its marble pillars rise upward, mosaics shimmer, and the air hums with chant. In one moment, you feel the weight of empire reborn. In another, you hear only the footsteps of a man walking among his people, speaking plainly, ruling with energy, dreaming of eternity. Charlemagne was not only king, not only conqueror, he was a bridge between Rome and medieval Europe, between war and learning, between the chaos of tribes and the dream of empire. His crown may rest in dust, but his vision still whispers in the fabric of Europe itself. The story of Charlemagne is often told through battlefields, crowns, and conquests. But there is another side to his reign, quieter, yet perhaps more enduring. A revival of knowledge, a flicker of light in an age often painted as darkness. Historians call it the Carolingian Renaissance, but to those who lived it, it was less a grand rebirth than a fragile flame, one that might easily have been snuffed out by the winds of war. Close your eyes and imagine the Europe of the 8th century. Cities had shrunk, roads were broken, Roman schools and libraries were long forgotten in the West. Knowledge, once flowing through marble halls, now survived only in scraps, carried in the memories of monks, hidden in the dim libraries of monasteries. The world seemed quieter, rougher, more uncertain. And yet, in this silence, Charlemagne dreamed of something greater. At Aachen, Charlemagne built his palace complex, not only as a symbol of power, but as a center of thought. He drew scholars from across distant lands. From England came Alcuin of York, a teacher steeped in classical learning. From Italy came Paul the Deacon. From Spain came Theodulf of Orleans. And from across Francia came men trained in scriptoria. Together, they formed a circle of wisdom around the king. Picture the palace school at Aachen, the great hall alive with the murmur of Latin, children reciting, clerks bending over parchment. Charlemagne himself sat among them, not as distant sovereign, but as student. Chroniclers say he tried to learn to write, holding tablets in his bed at night, though his fingers never mastered the skill. Yet what he lacked in practice, he possessed in vision. He understood that to rule not only by the sword, but by the mind, was to create something that could outlast battles. One of the most subtle yet powerful changes of this era was the reform of script. Until then, manuscripts were written in cramped, irregular letters, often unreadable, even to those who knew Latin. But under Charlemagne's scholars, a new style emerged. Carolingian minuscule, clear, rounded letters, spaced with care, words separated, punctuation refined. For the first time in centuries, writing became accessible, legible. Imagine a monk in a candlelit scriptorium, quill poised, carefully drawing each curve, each line. The letters flow with elegance, the words spread like gentle rhythm across parchment. This script became the foundation for modern European writing, a legacy still hidden in the shapes of the letters you read today. But it was not only form, it was content. Manuscripts from the ancient world, fragile and few, were gathered and copied. Works of Virgil, Ovid, Cicero, Augustine, and the scriptures themselves were preserved. Without this careful copying, countless texts might have vanished forever into dust. Picture the monastery libraries. Scrolls and codices, bound in leather, resting in silence. Monks moving through cloisters, chanting prayers, then bending over desks to copy line after line. Their work was slow, painstaking, yet sacred. Each word was a bridge, carrying memory across centuries. Without them, the chain of knowledge might have broken entirely. Charlemagne's Renaissance was not only scholarly, but spiritual. He sought to bring unity to the Frankish Church, standardizing liturgy, clarifying doctrine, and enforcing clerical discipline. Bishops and abbots became not only religious leaders, but guardians of culture. Monasteries, once isolated, became centers of teaching. Their schools opened to the sons of nobles and even commoners. This was not only about faith, it was about order. In a world where kingdoms fractured and chaos threatened, the church offered stability, continuity, a rhythm of prayer and learning that could anchor society. And Charlemagne, crowned by the Pope, stood as both emperor and protector of this order. Yet the Carolingian Renaissance was fragile. Its flame flickered against strong winds. Most people in the empire still lived in hardship, tilling fields, struggling to survive. Literacy remained rare, knowledge confined mostly to clergy and elites. The glow of learning illuminated palaces and monasteries, but vast stretches of the realm remained untouched. Even so, the contrast was profound. Where once there was silence, now hymns rose. Where once manuscripts decayed, now copies multiplied. Where once the memory of Rome seemed lost, now it whispered again through parchment and prayer. Charlemagne's chapel at Aachen embodied this vision. Octagonal in shape, inspired by Byzantine design, it was clad in marble brought from Italy. Its mosaics shimmered with golden light. Entering its space, one felt both Rome reborn and something entirely new. Here, Charlemagne prayed, ruled, and dreamed of empire. Here, scholars debated, bishops planned reforms, and poets recited verses. The chapel was more than stone. It was a symbol of the marriage of sword and scripture, empire and faith. When Charlemagne died in 814, the Carolingian Renaissance did not end. His successors carried fragments of his vision, though his empire soon fractured. Yet the manuscripts endured, the script endured, the memory of learning endured. Even as Viking ships raided coasts, as sons quarreled over crowns. It is said that without the Carolingian Renaissance, Europe might have lost touch with its ancient heritage entirely, that the works of Rome, the philosophy of Greece, the very scriptures themselves might have been lost. Instead, they were carried forward, fragile but unbroken, across the dark centuries until new renaissances would rise. As you drift with this story, imagine the stillness of a monastic night. A cloister wrapped in silence, only the flicker of lamps burning. A monk bends over parchment, lips moving silently as he copies a line from Virgil or a psalm from David. Outside, the wind rustles the trees, carrying echoes of distant wars. But here, in this room, memory is preserved. The Carolingian Renaissance was not a blaze, not a golden age, but a flicker of light in darkness. Yet, sometimes, a flicker is enough. Enough to carry words, ideas, prayers, across centuries, enough to keep alive the fragile chain of civilization. Enough to remind us that, even in chaos, humanity can choose to preserve rather than destroy, to remember rather than forget. It was fragile, yes, but it was light, and from that light, the future found its way. Charlemagne had dreamed of unity, of one empire under one crown. But when he died in 814, his vast realm passed to his son, Louis the Pious. Louis was devout, earnest, and gentle, but he carried not the iron will of his father. And when he, too, passed, the empire was divided among his sons. Here the story of greatness bends into sorrow, for where Charlemagne had united, his heirs divided. The Frankish custom of partition, the splitting of lands among sons, turned empire into rivalry. Brothers who should have stood as allies soon stood as enemies. In 843, after years of bitter conflict, the Treaty of Verdun was signed. It split the empire into three: West Francia, East Francia, and a fragile middle kingdom stretching from the North Sea to Italy. Imagine the map, a once mighty empire now fractured, its borders drawn by blood and compromise. West Francia, ruled by Charles the Bald, would slowly evolve into what we now know as France. East Francia, under Louis the German, would lay the foundation for Germany. The central strip, ruled by Lothair, was rich yet unstable, destined to dissolve in time. The unity of Christendom, crowned in Charlemagne's day, was broken. Monks still copied manuscripts, churches still rose, but politics fell again into the cycle of division. The empire had been a giant. Now it was three struggling heirs, each too weak to carry the whole. Picture the sorrow of the age. The great chapel at Aachen still stood, its mosaics gleaming, but the empire it symbolized was gone. Brothers marched armies against one another, burning fields once sown by their own people. The dream of a unified Christian empire, one Rome reborn, faded into quarrels over borders and crowns. And yet, from this fragmentation came something unexpected. The divisions of Verdun planted the seeds of modern Europe. Out of broken unity, nations would grow. Out of fraternal strife, identities hardened. France, Germany, Italy, all trace faint lines back to this moment of division. As you drift deeper into this story, feel the weight of contrast. Charlemagne crowned in glory, his heirs dividing his realm, a dream of unity, undone by inheritance, a giant of history, followed by quarreling brothers. The empire had fractured, and as it weakened, storms from beyond the horizon gathered. For in the years to come, Europe would tremble beneath the thunder of new invaders. As the unity of the Frankish realm dissolved, storms gathered at its borders. From the north, the west, and the east came waves of invaders, swift, merciless, and relentless. The weakened kingdoms, fractured by brotherly quarrels, now faced trials greater than any crown dispute. First came the Vikings, seafarers from Scandinavia. Picture their longships gliding silently along mist-covered rivers, their prows carved with dragon heads, their sails catching the wind. They struck suddenly, raiding monasteries, burning villages, seizing treasure. Monks at prayer heard the crash of axes against doors, the roar of fire consuming wooden halls. No place seemed safe, not even the heart of Francia, for the Vikings sailed deep into rivers like the Seine and the Loire. From the south came the Saracens, raiders from Muslim lands across the Mediterranean. Their ships swept along coasts, striking Provence, Italy, and the islands. They plundered towns, captured slaves, and left smoke rising above harbours. To the Franks, the Saracens were both traders and enemies, shadows from across the sea who could bring silk or fire. And from the east came the Magyars, fierce horsemen riding out of the steppe. Their arrows rained down in sudden raids, their speed unmatched. Villages on the frontiers lived in terror, watching the horizon for dust clouds that signaled oncoming riders. Like the Huns before them, they seemed almost unstoppable, a storm of hooves pounding across Europe. The contrast was sharp. Within churches, monks copied sacred texts, whispering psalms by candlelight. Outside, invaders threatened to sweep it all away. Kings tried to muster armies, but divided realms struggled to defend themselves. Lords raised castles, villagers built stockades. Faith became the refuge of the frightened. Yet from these invasions, something new began to take shape. The constant threat forced the Franks to adapt. Power shifted further to local lords who could build walls and command knights. Castles rose across the land. Feudal bonds tightened. The chaos of invasion carved the framework of medieval society itself. As you drift deeper into this story, imagine the rhythm of those years, the silence of dawn, broken by sudden attack, the fear of fire on the horizon, the prayers for deliverance. And yet, out of this storm, Europe endured. The invaders would one day settle, convert, and weave themselves into the fabric of the continent. The Frankish kingdoms had been battered, scarred, and reshaped, but their legacy was not finished. Out of division and invasion, something larger remained. The echo of a people whose story would outlive both ruin and conquest.